Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone joining us for this Atlas Live webinar for the month of October. Really appreciate everyone tuning in, ready to hear all about carbon projects, what makes a soil carbon project work. My name is Victoria Lawrence. I'm the Senior Consultant here at Atlas Carbon and Maya Grazing. And today I'm also joined by my colleague, Amanda Young. Hi, Amanda.
Hi Vic, how are you today?
Good, good. Amanda is also a consultant here at Atlas Carbon and Maya Grazing with me, and she's also New South Wales grazier just out of Tamworth. How's the farm looking today?
Oh, look, it's great. We're having a wonderful spring here in northwest New South Wales, across the Tamworth property and the one out at Ballatta. So lots of happy cows. It's a good life.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I it's
Vic.
actually I was just in Orange actually over the weekend at the Australian National Field Days, and a shout out to people who come up and say, I've never spoken to you, I recognize you from all these webinars that you're doing, and it's actually really nice. Shout out to Stuart if you're on the line, saying that he feels like he knows me because he's watched so many of these videos. But it is really nice when people come and say that they are learning a lot. Sometimes it is a bit, we don't know who's on the line when we're doing this, and sometimes it can be a little bit two-dimensional, just you and me having a chat, Amanda, but we know there are people watching and also watching the recording. So anyone that registers for any of our webinars will automatically be sent to the recording of this. So if you are interested in having a look at our back catalogue as well, we've got a lot of different topics. And on that note, if you have anything off topic that you want us to cover, we'd be very happy to take those suggestions. We're always wondering, what are the topics that people are really interested in learning? I know there's a lot out there about carbon. There's a lot to cover. So trying to narrow it down to the things that might need a bit more clarity, just in the industry or with Atlas itself, we're always happy to take suggestions about what to do. So on that note, what we're doing today is talking about what makes a soil carbon project work. Now, we were speaking with our head agronomist or head chief grazing consultant, as we call him, Bart Davidson, earlier today, and he said, you guys have got a job ahead of you. It is a big topic. It could take hours if we really wanted it to, but we are just trying to talk about the general themes that we specifically look at within Atlas Carbon as to what we think would make a successful soil carbon project, and talking you through those a bit today. If you do have any questions along the way, there is a Q&A box that we can get into, and also if we don't get to them, we'll get to you directly after the webinar if we run out of time. We will also cover the Atlas Carbon process as well. So we are a little bit different in that we have a very thorough due diligence process. We don't believe that you should be signing a carbon project unless you're actually getting people out on the ground and doing the due diligence, looking at your soil, understanding your pasture, your management, your infrastructure. All of those kind of elements are super, super critical to understand when you come to a soil carbon project. So I might throw to you, Amanda. Do you want to tell everyone sort of what Atlas is about, what Maya is about, where we've come from, and a bit of background?
Sure, thanks, Vic. So I think you've given a fairly good introduction simply by explaining what we do that is different, which is that focus that we have on due diligence. So at Atlas Carbon, we are a carbon project developer, and we're showing producers the how of building soil carbon. So that very much links through to our second offer, which is Maya Grazing, which is all about the processes that help build soil carbon, which one of the things we'll be focusing on today being grazing management. So with Atlas Carbon, we support graziers through practice adoption as part of the process and help improve the productivity and profitability of the grazing business. So the benefits with Atlas Carbon go beyond just carbon credits and into, that boost into the core production. And when you're an Atlas Carbon customer, you also use Maya Grazing, but we also have a lot of customers, because we have had Maya Grazing for around 9 years now, which is very exciting, coming up to our 10-year anniversary. Maya Grazing is a grazing management software and specialised support system. And a lot of our customers of Maya Grazing don't do soil carbon projects with Atlas Carbon. It can be a standalone offer as well. So that's why you see that the two logos on our shirts. Most of our business works across both Atlas Carbon and Maya Grazing.
Yeah, it's been a good story. I mean, I've spoken to particularly a few people over the weekend who said, I've seen Maya Grazing a lot around over the years. Atlas is relatively new. We're sort of a couple of years into the game, but we sort of, we believe that we've got almost 10 years experience already, because Maya Grazing was such an integral part to actually building the Atlas offering. And that really is our ethos for Atlas, is making sure that core business and grazing productivity is the heart of what you're doing in a soil carbon project, and those carbon credits, that revenue from that is just the cherry on top. So we do look at those two aspects in conjunction with each other when we are assessing a successful carbon project. It is the productivity being the core of it, and then the carbon on top of that, and how those two really work together to make a project successful. And we will talk a bit about that as well. We did have a lot of customers within Maya Grazing, you know, a few years ago saying, you know, we've been customers for a long time. We know you guys really understand what it takes to build that soil carbon within the grazing system. And so it was almost customer demand saying, we want you to be that final link in the chain. There's a lot of talk about carbon credits and what graziers can actually earn and do on their property within this carbon space. That's really how Atlas came to be. So thanks for giving that overview, and that really leads well into talking about this due diligence part of what we do at Atlas. The first step is looking at a cost benefit report. So we want to give a free service to our prospective customers to say, is this even worth your time? Is it worth your investment to actually start looking at a soil carbon project on your property? Because they're not all created equal, and unfortunately not all farms are probably suitable to grow carbon and really return that bang for buck when you're doing an investment for a carbon project. So we can do an assessment for you, a very desktop high level analysis to say, look, is this actually going to stack up, and what are the costs associated? What are the potential upsides in both livestock productivity and for soil carbon sequestration rates, looking at the different soil types, and just give you an answer about, you know, is this worth us actually coming boots on the ground and getting into the farm visit? So that's the next step. Do you want to talk a bit about that farm visit process, Amanda, and the report that comes out of that?
Yeah, for sure. And that cost benefit report, as Vic has mentioned, is that desktop stage, and it's sort of the drafting gate where we will say to you when we present that, is it worth doing some paid due diligence, which is the farm visit stage. That's where our team come out, they bring a rig, they do, and we've actually, as Vic mentioned, there's some previous webinars you can look up if you're interested in learning specifically more about that farm visit stage. There's a whole webinar dedicated to that now on our website. So we come out, we really get to know you as farmers and your farm and what your production system's all about. We get to know your soils. We do extensive soil testing and pasture testing as well. And following on from that, that's when we can deliver the project viability assessment, which is really putting, you know, a lot more refinement to the assumptions that we've provided at that cost benefit first stage. This is where we're really deciding in conjunction with you, are we going to enter into a soil carbon project, which is minimum 10-year agreement with us as Atlas Carbon and a 25-year agreement with the government. So it's a big decision, and that's why there are 3 steps before we get to that soil carbon project registration stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really good sum up of really what we're going to talk about today, which is the aspects that make a successful soil carbon project. And I mean, like I mentioned, this could get very complex. And the whole point of Atlas's role within a soil carbon project is to get that granularity and to get that detail about how do we actually make this successful. And so particularly when you're registered into a soil carbon project, the first step is looking at this 5-year management plan that we do in conjunction with the producer and say, you know, what's practical, but here's our recommendations of how we think it will actually really work on your place. So we'll jump into that now. And the first one really is looking at soil. And I mentioned on our cost benefit report, we do look at that soil type for your property. There are soil mapping tools available for us to do that, to actually have a very specific look at what soil types have you got on your property. And really the ones with higher cation exchange, higher clay content are ideal, because the clay is the particle that actually holds on to carbon, you know, longer than say a sand. But that's, you know, there's a big scale of what makes a ideal soil type within a soil carbon project. And so that's a big part of our assessment, is to looking at, well, where does it sit on that scale? And based on size of property as well. If you've got a smaller place, sometimes it makes that more sensitivity to needing a stronger soil, needing a soil that can hold on to that carbon a bit better. But if you've got scale, that sensitivity suddenly becomes less important, and really looks at, well, if we've actually got a bigger area, we can get away with a slightly lesser soil carbon uplift and still make it worthwhile. Were there any parts of the soil side of things that you wanted to dive into, Amanda?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, this is soil carbon project specifically that we're talking about today. So soil is really the heart and soul of it. And when we're looking at soil, like Vic said, you know, there's all different types of soil all around Australia. In a perfect world, we'd be doing soil carbon projects on beautiful vertisols and maybe a few dermasols. You know, your beautiful cracking black clays. That's the gold star for a soil carbon project. We'd love to talk to you if you have those on your property. Reality, not everyone has those, and not everyone is able to do a soil carbon project on those sort of soils. And not every soil carbon project that is underway with us at Atlas Carbon or other carbon project developers is on your gold star soil. Sometimes you have, you know, all different types of soil, you know, but we probably really can't work so much with the sandy soils and the more granite-based soils unless we've got a heap of it, because it all comes down to how much soil have we got to work with. And that's where usually we're working with a minimum of 800 hectares. And why the clays are so good is because you've got more depth usually, and they can hold carbon. There's more stability in the carbon at depth, which is critical for retaining that soil carbon over the extent of a carbon project. So with this cost benefit report that Vic explained earlier, you know, that's where we're really looking at drafting gate, you know, do you have enough soil? And we can usually see a bit of that from those publicly available data sets, soil mapping and that sort of thing. But it's really not until we get on farm with the rigs, and we can then analyze the results of those to see, you know, not only what type of soil do you have, but what condition is it in? You know, what's its current health? What's its potential? And, you know, what grass have you got? What are your root systems like? There's so many factors to soil beyond what was inherently there, you know, and we can't change a granite or a sand soil into a cracking clay, but we can improve soil health and productivity. So there's some of the things that really are going to be the difference of whether a carbon project is going to stack up and work for you, is what can you do with that soil? What's going to work in with your goals for your business as well? Because you could have the best cracking black clay in Australia, but it might just be losing more and more carbon every year because you're driving in with the offsets and destroying it and all the carbon's coming out of it. So it's not just about the soil that you've got, it's what you're going to do with that soil. And that's where the grazing management piece, which we'll get to, becomes important. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I don't have cracking black clays, I've got variable soil, that's most grazing properties, you know. So what we're often finding when we come out is how much soil have we got to work with? You might have a 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 hectare place, but it actually turns out there's really only 800, 1,000, 1,200 hectares it's actually suitable for a carbon project. So it's about doing those carbon projects on the areas that have the best potential, that you're going to get the best return on investment by baselining, doing the practice change on those hectares. And that's what we work through in our process to identify what are your best areas of soil that we can really move the needle, sequester and hold on to as much carbon for you over the term of the contract.
Yeah, that variability piece is often a question that comes up with people saying, look, I've just got so many different types, you know, different areas of my property are productive and others aren't as much. And again, that's where we look at this variability, and something that comes up a lot is actually segmenting those different areas out within a project. So if they are all, you know, relatively good in terms of what the upside could be, but they are still variable, we then separate them out into what we call carbon estimation areas, and that way you're not just averaging everything across. So you really are focusing on, you know, if we've got one side of the property, the east side, that's really high potential, we will segment that out from, say, the west that might be a bit lower, so that you're not losing potential gains between averages when you start soil sampling and looking at the productivity and uplift of those areas. The other part to do with things that are a little bit out of our control, like Amanda said, with soil, there is management that definitely comes into the potential of that. But one of the things that very much is out of our control is rainfall. And this often comes up a lot because there are some really good soils, but unfortunately in areas where the rainfall just isn't there. So generally when we look at properties, we sort of say the rough benchmark is about 500 mils and above, or 20 inches of rainfall. And that really comes down to the ability to grow that biomass and grow those deep-rooted perennial plants that we really do need to improve that underlying productivity of a grazing property. If we can't grow the grass, we physically can't create the solar panels of the pasture that then pulls the carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it into the soil through those deep-rooted systems. So yeah, I mean, again, there is always variability within this. If you've got scale and you've got good like those cracking black clays, sometimes that rainfall then can be a bit lower than that sort of 500 mil level, and the scale of that as well also has an impact. Any thoughts additionally on the rainfall, Amanda?
Yeah, it's I think you've covered it, Vic, but 500 mils and above is great. As we all know, we're doing some carbon projects in lower rainfall areas. It's just that is a sort of a safer number, but we've also seen areas that are really high rainfall, but the soil is not strong enough. So, soil is critically important. Rainfall, we can't control how much we get. As you said, Vic, what we can control is how much we keep. And that comes down to the quality of the soil and how well we manage it as well. So I think that's probably a good segue into the next.
Very good segue, which is
yeah.
probably going to be our biggest talking point, but you take it away. I know you're very passionate about this, being a grazier yourself, and you've worked really hard to tighten your grazing management up on your own property.
Yeah, oh look, it's a work in progress, Vic, but grazing management, I think if every farm was managing their grazing as though they were in a soil carbon project, whether or not they were in one, we'd have some pretty healthy grazing lands out there. Personally, my farms unfortunately are too small. I have lovely soil, but not enough of it. So I'd like to think I use my grazing, and I've always used my grazing before I worked for the business, to manage my soil in such a way that I improve it. I'm not going to turn it all into cracking black clays, but I'm going to make it as productive and healthy and constantly improving as I can, and I'm going to capture every bit of rainfall, and I'm going to use the animals to do that. So grazing management is the exciting thing, and why we get excited about it here at Maya and Atlas is because it is the thing you can control. There's so much in ag that you can't control. We're often price takers. We can't control the rain. We can't control the fact that we have granite or sand or whatever below the grass, but we can really influence the way that our pastures perform, and then the productivity we get on top of that. So how many kilos of beef, sheep, whatever we happen to be grazing, how that all looks, improving the biodiversity, all of those things. So good grazing management will improve your soil carbon sequestration and retention, which is probably the most important thing. Like, most soils can sequester carbon. Can they keep it? Clay soils inherently better physical properties to allow themselves to do that, to retain it, but grazing management allows us to build that biomass, that ground cover, prevent erosion, all the things that also will grow more kilos of beef or sheep. So grazing management, it's our bread and butter. It's what we at Atlas and I have known all about for a very long time. And one of the things that we do, even at a cost benefit report stage, is we ask you a lot of questions about your current grazing management, such as, you know, how many mobs do you have? How many paddocks do you have? How many paddocks do you typically rest versus typically graze? Because then we can actually benchmark that against the huge data set that we have within Maya Grazing. In Maya Grazing, we have one of the biggest, if not the biggest, grazing data set in the world. So we know what good grazing management looks like, and we also know the outcomes of that. So having rest periods that are appropriate, you know, mob per paddock, density, those sort of, they're the tools that you have as a land manager to really move the needle to make a soil carbon project stack up, to get you from starting point to a hopefully not finished point, but an improved point.
Yeah, and there are a large scale of adoption within people who come and talk to us about carbon projects. Some people have been doing high intensity grazing management for 30 years. And so within a carbon project, we have requirements from the Clean Energy Regulator about what's called additionality. So this talks about, well, what are the things that you are going to do differently to actually build this soil carbon? The Clean Energy Regulator is not just going to give out carbon credits if you're just going to carry on doing the same thing. The incentive is to actually do something tangibly different on your property to boost that soil carbon. Now, for most people, 90+% of our customers that we talk to, that is just through wire and water, which is a very simple way to drastically improve that grazing management by making paddocks smaller, improving the density of your grazing. So you're taking, you know, you're doing more intense grazes, moving them on quicker. How that actually looks in terms of, you know, that could be incredibly different from one producer to the next based on scale, based on current setup. So it's not a specific formula we look at how you currently are, and let's move, like you said, Amanda, move the dial, move the needle into improving that and changing that more. If those setups are pretty intense already, then we look at other things such as, you know, soil ameliorants, reseeding pastures. There are different categories that we can go down the path of to actually boost that productivity and therefore the carbon as a result of that. We have actually had a question. Oh, sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's really important to note that a lot of our first Atlas Carbon customers, and indeed nationally outside of Atlas Carbon, some of the very first soil carbon projects in Australia were already doing really good grazing management. So it's not as though you need to start from a point of set stocking, very little wire and water in order for grazing management to be the additionality that the regulator will approve as your key factor in a soil carbon project. It's about showing that you are doing more than you were originally doing. So a lot of people were already, you know, quite advanced graziers in terms of the number of paddocks, you know, their metrics, their grazing metrics really strong. But after commencing a carbon project, we're doing more. As Vic said, if there's nothing else that we can do, if it's maxed out, you're moving cattle twice a day, your paddocks are, you know, your density is through the roof, then it will be a different approved action that we would be using to put that through the regulator. It could be, yeah, targeted use of ameliorants or seeding, and sometimes that might even happen within a grazing management focused change. We might identify through the farm visit or through the course of the project, hey, this soil, it's got some physical chemical limitation that could be improved by the addition of lime, gypsum, whatever, and we'll do that along with the grazing management. So grazing management's not the only way that you can make a soil carbon project stack up, but it's the one that we really believe, as Vic said, in 90% of cases, 90% plus, is going to be the easiest and most productive and probably most cost effective to control.
Yeah, that's another part is I know there's you know, talks about, well, what is this actually going to cost me? And obviously we look at that first up in that cost benefit report to give everyone a very clear picture of this is actually what it's going to cost. We're not here to take people down the garden path and paint a rainbow about all of these upsides and sort of sweep the costs under the rug. It is a very real part of a soil carbon project, and we want to be honest and transparent with you about what does that return on investment look like. And we have had a question from Martin come in, got an interest in biochar and the use of that within soil carbon projects. And I'll just say, we don't rule anything in or out. It really comes down to, is this going to build soil carbon? So when there are, producers asking us about specific techniques, it's not a matter of we have a hard line on anything specifically that we won't do in a project, but if it's detrimental to the increase of soil carbon, that's something that we say it may not be useful to you in your quest to actually build productivity and obviously build soil carbon as well. So I hope that helps, Martin. And that is a big part of what our farm visit does, is consults with the producer on, well, what are the things that you're interested in? What have you tried? What has worked? What has not worked? And really come to a point where everyone's in agreement of, all right, these are the things that we know will work. What can we incorporate that you want to try, and work together to actually develop those plans going forward into a carbon project if we get to that point. So we'll quickly go through, we're running out of time, Amanda. We've been so thorough with our—
So excited. So much
excited.
fun.
We are just going to quickly go through what actually happens on these farm visits. As Amanda had alluded to before, the cost benefit report is looking at this high level view of, will it work for you? Is it actually worth you spending money for us to come out, boots on the ground, really get a full agronomic suite of soil samples on the property that will then form our recommendations about moving forward and how successful a project would actually be. Again, it does make us very nervous that there potentially is projects that go ahead without this due diligence on farm, and it's all done remotely. That's not what we do. We believe it needs to be ground truthed. It needs to actually have the consultation, because at the end of the day, this is a partnership. This is a relationship. If we go forward with the soil carbon project, you need to have the trust in us, and we need to have the mutual trust in you, that we all agree on going forward what essentially the plan would look like. So do you want to take us through a little bit of this farm visit assessment? You've got a very first-hand view. You often have the rig around you. Being in the middle of New South Wales, it's come through your place a fair bit, so you've seen it a lot. And it is quite impressive to actually appear on a farm one day with this big soil rig, and the producers actually going around with the team, talking through all the different paddocks, talking through the soil sites that we've identified as needing to get some more science behind. Any comments on that?
Yeah, look, I think not a lot to add there, Vic, but just that the excitement that happens during this property assessment is, it never fails to excite. Yeah, you can see there in that photo that it's the farm owner on the left, and then Rafe and Bart pulling out some soil, and we really involved the farmer in that day. It's really important to be there and to see the soil coming out of the ground, to see these guys even before they send it off for assessment. They're seeing, good soil coming out. Does it all align with what they've seen on the desktop analysis when they were looking at soil mapping and that sort of thing? Because often it is a little out. Those data sets, they're only as good as satellites and all that sort of thing can provide. So ground truthing that sometimes areas can be better than they thought they were. Sometimes they're a little worse. This is also really important to inform if we do go to a project later, and this is one of the things we actually just came fresh out of a meeting on this. We're doing a lot of baselining at the moment in our business for some of our projects that are at the registered stage, and it's really exciting. But the work that happens here during the farm visit also helps inform the baselining later on. So it's really understanding that stratification, making sure we can limit variance later on. So this exercise here saves a lot of costs potentially, and maximizes the amount of credits that we can get later on. So that's Bart's favorite photo. That is him. He loves that. I don't think he does social media, but if he did social media, that would definitely be his profile picture.
Yeah.
So he loves that. That's some beautiful soil, and he's showing the roots are what's holding it together, and that's why we love clay, right? Because look what the potential for a root to grow down. put that carbon down at depth, and carbon at depth is just more stable, so it's going to be less susceptible to seasonal flux and that sort of thing, so droughts, floods, and what have you. So that's Bart excited, very excited actually, and we just love to show farmers to see that living roots in their soil and that sort of thing it gets pretty good, and that's where we start to see the potential, and it's exciting.
Yeah, I know every time that we are prepping a presentation with Bart, he always says, Vic, you've got to put this photo in. This is the gold standard of what we're looking for in terms of deep-rooted perennial plants and the structure of that soil. And he says he learns so much about the management through not only talking to the producer, but actually pulling these cores up and talking them through with the landowner, and getting so much more of a comprehensive understanding of how things have actually been grazed, because he can see it there. He can see it in the soil and in the plants when he's pulling them up and putting all these pieces together to really understand, will this actually stack up? How is this going to go going forward? And I think that's a huge part of what people want from us, is the honesty of, is this going to be successful or not? And we've had conversations where we've gone out on farm and eventually said, look, it will be a tough grasp, and it really is not in our interest to tell people that everything's going to be successful when it's not. So we really do focus on the elements of the farm visit, what's involved, and the different parts of the property. And that also involves that extensive analysis we talked about. So a full suite of soil tests and pasture tissue tests that everyone gets as part of that farm visit process as well. But like you mentioned, Amanda, the excitement, how much people get from those days. They've learned so much more about their own properties, and they really get a very clear understanding about, even if they decide not to go with a soil carbon project in the end, so much value from this day about how to actually improve productivity as a whole on the farm. And this is a very good example of all the different types of things that are seen across these farm visits, different soil types. I mean, you can sense the excitement just by all of the photos that we get. We get probably 100+ photos from every visit, because the team led by Bart and Rafe's on that team as well, Rafe Ritchie, really, both of them are so passionate about making good productivity, making it work on livestock properties. I mean, it's their heart and soul of the job, and of Atlas Carbon, and really Maya grazing as well. So we've got a lot of good stories that have come out of these farm visits, and also the use of technology to add another layer on top of that to really give a lot of results and a lot of clarity to those producers. We pulled together a report at the end of that, which really refines that initial cost benefit report to really help people understand, okay, now we've come out on farm, we're able to map this property into the different areas that we understand in terms of variance, and look at some of those things on the ground as well. So there's a Hone Red device there looking at soil in the field. Just before we wrap up, did you have any sort of last thoughts about any of the farm visit process, or anything else?
No, I mean, I think looking at this, there's probably a whole webinar in the importance of having the right partner to work with once you're actually in a project. We focus very much today on knowing what makes a carbon project work, so that you know whether or not to go into one, and talking a little bit about how we work with you to identify that. But once you're in a carbon project, what makes it work? If you've got the right soil, the right grazing management, the right rainfall, everyone's happy, we do a carbon project. What's really going to make it work after that? And seeing tech here on the page is a big part of that. In that, where Atlas Carbon comes into play is a bit different to anyone else is that inherent use of Maya grazing, because you do need data, you do need technology to calibrate, record, and track progress, up to and including how you then report that through the audits to the regulator and that sort of thing. Say, look, this is what I said I would do to sequester carbon. This is how I'm doing it. Here are my records of that. And making that a seamless and stress-free and productive process is an important part of making a carbon project work, because it's got to be an enjoyable and profitable part of your business. So I think maybe we'll talk about that a little further in a future webinar, unless anyone would like to comment that sounds really boring and they have a better suggestion, because I think that's an important one. Carbon projects are longer than most marriages, and marriages do require work, so do carbon projects. So what kind of work do you have to do once you're in a carbon project, and what kind of work will we be doing, or another carbon project developer, to help you through that?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Amanda. And we will, I know we're about 5 minutes over, but we will wrap up now. If you are interested in starting the process and getting a free cost benefit report, understanding your property a bit more, just hover your phone camera over that QR code and you'll be taken to our website. Otherwise, you can just go to our website, atlascarbon.ag, or send us an email, give us a call. We're available when you want to chat if you are interested in getting that free cost benefit report and just starting the conversation with us. No obligation to go forward after that if you don't want to, but it is a really handy tool to get a better understanding about your specific property, what you're currently doing and what you could be doing differently. So again, my name is Victoria and you've been joined by Amanda as well, and we're always happy to have a chat with you. So feel free to get in touch with us, and I really appreciate everyone joining us here today. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks, Vic.